I'm Noelle with Noelle Rollins Art, and these are my top 3 ways to blend colored pencils for better drawings. So one of the most important things with drawing with colored pencils is knowing how to blend your colors. So these are my top 3 favorite ways to blend colors, starting with the first one, which is the colorless blender. So we are just going to lay some color down here. I'm doing it in various pressures just to show and simulate an actual drawing. We're going to overlap some of the color, and you can still see the white of the paper shining through or showing through. And that's always the hard part, taking a colored pencil drawing for where it looks like this, and you can see all of the paper through and it's not fully blended. There's a time and a place for it, but if you're wanting that smooth look, what can you do? So I'm just going in to show a little bit darker. I really want you to be able to see ranging from just a light tone all the way to more and more saturation of color and how this blender works. And this is a Crayon Dash colorless blender that I'm going to use. Mine is very well used, so I have it in an extender handle, but typically they're the same size as a full-size colored pencil. And you can get them from an art supply store. So when I do skin tones, I often do more of the circular stroke. So I wanted to just show you how that ends up looking once we blend it. So here I am with the blender. I am applying medium pressure, and then I just want to show you the difference of doing the circular versus just long strokes. And you can see what this does is it just takes that and it blends all the colors together. So you suddenly don't see any background color. It has this smooth effect, more of a saturated. I'm going to go through and leave some spots here of non-blended areas just for very obvious contrast. So one thing it also does is you can see it's a little bit darker color as I blend it versus how it just looked on the paper without it. So that's something you want to keep in mind as well. So you can kind of see the different effects. So number 2. This is a technique that is probably my second most common. And I will use this a lot with faces, skin. You'll get the idea. It's called burnishing. And so what I'm going to simulate here is going in and you have your base color. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on the pencil. Coming in with another layer of a yellow tone. This is pretty similar, a very sped up way of how I do skin tones as well often. Come in with a sort of apricot color. And I'm just doing parts of it each way to kind of simulate how a portrait would be, where there's more shading in other areas than some areas where it's left lighter. Now again, typically when I'm doing a portrait, I'm not just doing straight lines back and forth. It's a little bit more strategic, small little circular strokes. Here is a pink color. If you can get a very light pressure when you're doing skin, I love using this pink color to come in with very light circular strokes, and it simulates just the blood vessels in the skin. If you can do it so light that you barely notice, it will give sort of a realistic feel to the portrait. And again, there's nothing wrong if you wanted to leave your portrait how these are looking now at this level of blended. It still can look great. And it can be really scary to come in with another color and push hard. And what you want to do is make sure that you have your portrait where you want it to a certain level before you try this technique. You don't want to do it halfway through because, of course, once you push on that paper and you smooth all the waxes into all of the tooth of the paper, it makes it so it's hard to color on top of that. So here I have layers of purples and just kind of showing a close-up here. Now I'm coming in with the white and I'm just pushing with more pressure and blending the waxes together. So you can see where it just gives a very smooth look to that. So that's what happens when you use white. Here is more of a beige color. And this can be good if you don't want the skin tone to be too light. You can come in with another color. And it's always a good idea to experiment. If you're doing this on a portrait, you might not want to try. You've worked so hard. You might not want to try just fully coming in over your portrait with that technique until you've experimented with it in smaller scales like this. And really make sure you have the look that you want. All right, and this is my absolute most common technique for blending. So what I would probably do actually on number 2 as well is I would come in with this technique over the top of that. So you have that very smooth area with the waxy finish, and you can come in with either mineral spirits or rubbing alcohol. And you can use a cotton swab or you can use a paintbrush of the size that will work best for your area. Don't be afraid to use a small one if it's more detailed, or you're going to want to use a larger one in bigger areas, and not to get too much of the mineral spirits or rubbing alcohol on your brush because you do not want to take it on the paper. You want to make sure that the area that you're doing this with is saturated with the colored pencils. But what it does is it breaks down the wax in the colored pencils and it allows it to just be left with this beautiful color. And sometimes once you break down some of that wax, you have to wait about 15 minutes or so after you do this technique for the paper to fully dry again. And then you can come back in and it has a little bit of tooth again for you to put some more layers on. So here, I just wanted to show all different situations. I pressed really hard on the edges, the top left and the bottom right, with yellows and oranges and pinks here, just to really show you how this, I'm using rubbing alcohol, but how it breaks down the colored pencils. Another technique people use are watercolor pencils, and then in that case all you would need is water, of course. And you can really have some fun with that as far as how much water or little water you'd want to use for how far you want to break them down. So now I'm just reuse this old bottle that I'd had from years ago, and I just pour more of the rubbing alcohol in it. I dip my brush and I just smooth. I'll pull the color a little bit and fill in the gaps. If this were a feature, I'd be being very careful around the edges of like the nostrils of the nose. I wouldn't just go flat over the whole thing. I would follow the strokes of the pencil. And you can see this is just starting to smooth it out. And again, I would do this on number 2 as well, if I were to follow up with that and smooth that out. And then I would come back in with those little tiny circular strokes of the reds, the pinks. This is just to show how that saturates the paper, and it'll leave an oily texture if you were to leave that there. So try to be very careful not to get it on your regular paper, especially if you're expecting any white to be showing through in your portrait or your drawing. So that's it. Those are the 3 tips that are really going to help you in your artwork. I cannot recommend them enough. There's more to be had, but those are the top 3 that I use all the time. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to give the video a like. I'd be so grateful. And subscribe to the channel for more tips. Bye.